Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Good morning, everyone. Today we are conducting the lecture number 9 in our course about Rupa. So far we have discussed what Rupas are in brief and how they have been explained in the canon in 3 ways. Then we also discussed about the Kalapa, how Kalapa is made out of the Mahabhutas, and also then how can Mahabhutas and the elements can be, Rupas can be understood through a Kalapa, investigating a Kalapa. Then we move on to a very special aspect, and also we discuss the oneness and variousness within a Kalapa. Then we move on to explain the Mahabhutas in the Rupa Sariras, the bodies of Rupas. It's clusters of Kalapas. There we discussed about 2 types of Mahabhutas, Kalapiya, the interunitary, and inside the Kalapas. Now today would be a similar lecture, but the other approach, because I personally feel that would greatly help the listeners to understand how the meditation of 4 great elements can be done. So how, what will be the, though we study this in this way in very detail in Abhidhamma or fundamentals of the Theravada, but while we do the Vipassana meditation, what sort of an approach that we should make, because when we come to the method of Vipassana, Theravadians also have a specific unique way of explaining the method. So whatever you studied in Abhidhamma has to be modified to a certain level in order to bring it into Vipassana practice. So therefore, understanding the 4 great elements in their actual nature and trying to figure out how the Rupa is made would also assist us in our practice. But at the same time, since we are going to experience a body made out of 4 great elements, so we have to understand the great elements through the body, after investigating the body. So what we are supposed to do is investigate the characteristics of a physical body and then try to figure out how do they represent the 4 great elements. And then finally we come into the idea that these are just mere natures, mere qualities. They are not just selves. So that would greatly help us to understand, have the Vipassana knowledge. So today's lecture would be of 3 phases. So the 3 ideas, the 3 phases would be from Rupa Sarira to Mahabhuta. Then we explain how Mahabhutas can be found in a human body for our meditation. Then we study the Ekattanaya, Ekatta Bhava, and Nanatta Bhava. That is oneness and variousness in a physical body, right? So now if you remember, we discussed about how the 4 great elements can be found in a physical body. The first approach was we explained the 4 great elements, and then we figured out how a Rupa Sarira is made out of it. Now what we are going to do is we take a Rupa Sarira and try to investigate its qualities. So for that, for any of this reverse approach, like actually the practical approach, what we have to know is we have to take the object that we get as a reality. We have to consider it as a reality. Then we try to investigate its characteristics. Then we happen to find out, then we will find out that it's not made out of one thing, it's made out of certain different qualities. So these qualities would be attributed with the name of a reality, because if something cannot be divided any further, and if something can be felt with the wisdom, then it should be considered as a reality. So in order to do that, now what we are supposed to do is we take the Rupa Sarira, a body of Rupa. So we have 3 types of bodies normally. We have 3 types of bodies. a solid, a solid body, a liquid body, and a gas body. Right? These are the three states of Rupa. They are very important because for some practitioners, taking the apo parts of the body, the 12 apo, like starting from phlegm and so forth, bile, phlegm and so forth. So for some, just focusing on the element of apo of these physical bodies are enough. But for some, you have to understand all the 4 great elements in each and every apo. Right? So we should be able to know how to figure out the 4 great elements in a liquid even, in a solid. For instance, the bones. How do we understand the 4 great elements in a bone? And how do we understand the 4 great elements in a gas, which can be found in our body? So likewise, we should have the ability, the skill to differentiate the great elements in any given physical body, a material body. That's very vital in order to lead our Vipassana. So when we see someone, we should be able to figure out how 4 great elements exist within himself. In order to do that, we have to take the physical material body as a one thing, and then we investigate its characteristics. Now we'll start with a solid. Now if you take a solid, for instance, if you take a solid has a specific shape, and also when you touch it, you can feel the hardness. It's a hard thing. You can easily understand the hardness of this solid. And also if something is kept upon this, another solid, a relevant mass, the A can bear the B. It can hold it. It doesn't allow B to come into its space. So what are these qualities? The hardness can be found. It does not allowing another substance to come in, right? So this is the patavi. This is the patavi quality of a solid. If you are able to focus on this patavi called the hardness, the resistance for another substance to enter into it, either you with having touched it or either with your intellect, if you are able to understand this, this is called knowing the patavi in its intrinsic nature. Knowing the patavi in its intrinsic nature. So the difference is now when we focus at an object, always the idea comes, this is a thing. So instead of focusing this as a thing, what we are supposed to do is just to focus on that attribute, mere quality of hardness, mere resistance it gives to another substance to enter into its space. So that is a skill that we have to develop in order to understand this analysis. Normally our mind would take the entire thing as a solid, as a thing, solid thing. That is the nature of our mind. Now we always normally think this is a podium. But in order to understand their characteristics, what they are made out of, we have to get out of this idea and just focus on the real characteristics that can be felt to our wisdom or to our physical body or to any of our organs. The idea of a podium is created in our mind. But if you touch this, you can easily feel. Now another thing is, whatever you feel to the senses are ultimate realities. Senses, eye, ear, nose, tongue, body. You don't feel panyati into these senses. What you are feeling is the actual reality. We are becoming sensitive to the reality with these 5 senses. But we synthesize different ideas based on our experience, and we create the ideas of man, a person, a human being, or a deva, or a house, or whatever. These are called panyatis, the concepts created in our mind, synthesized in our mind, based on the actual experiences, based on the experience about realities that we get through the 5 senses. So the best way, now for example, Mahasi Sayadaw explains in our meditation, the Dhatu Manasikara, the 4 great element meditation, we normally use 2 doors of consciousness. Dwara means doors of consciousness. That is the mind door and the body door. mind door and the body door. With the body door, we can feel the heat, we can feel the hardness, and we can sometimes feel the pushing nature. So having felt it with the body door, we understand it with the mind door. Understanding comes always through the mind door. The feeling comes mostly with the body door. But after we have developed this skill and understood the four great elements through both the doors, we will be able to look into another object which is far away from us. Looking into its color, looking into its shape, we will be able to assume how the four great elements exist in there. It's just an assumption. But that is still becoming understanding the reality. So last time also we had a question about this. How do we to which level do we need to understand the reality? Do we need to understand the reality in its actual form, or do we need to understand the reality in its characteristics? Yes. In meditation, what we are supposed to do is understand the realities in their characteristics, not in their actual form. Actual form means not in very detail. What is the color of this kalapa? What is the amount of the hardness in that particular object? What is the ratio between hardness and cohesion in an object? You don't need to go into that level in order to have Vipassana wisdom. As long as you understand the characteristics, then according to the Theravada tradition, we say you are getting intact with the reality, intact with the reality of the material. So now seeing an object, for instance, if you take this mouse, the computer mouse. Now in this, we can feel a certain surface here. We can feel the hardness, and it doesn't allow this pen to go into through this. So this is the hardness. This hardness is not the mouse. Mouse, when we say a mouse, it has a certain shape, it has a certain color. The material is kept in one place, so it doesn't change its shape, because so these are these attributes. So the basic attributes. We are not talking about in detail like what it can do. We are not talking about these attributes. So if you talk about the very basic attributes of a mouse, now these are the physical attributes of a mouse. So these are the physical attributes. The hardness can be felt. So this hardness, now if you touch this mouse, we can feel a hard surface, and it doesn't allow another reality to go through this. So this is knowing hardness. So this hardness is not the mouse. That's the thing that you have to understand. It's not the mouse. Then what is this hardness? Patavi. It is made by Kalapiya Patavi, the Patavi which is inside the Kalapas, and also it can be the Patavi, the interunitary Patavi. Interunitary Patavi. The Patavi, the hardness that exists among the Kalapas, right? Among the Kalapas. For example, if you think about in detail that we discussed already, there are certain gaps between the spaces between the Kalapas, but still another object is kept. The resistance is there. So whether it's interunitary hardness or the hardness within a Kalapa, doesn't matter. In the end, when we think about a solid object, we feel the hardness. So that is how we understand hardness in a material body, similar to how we understood in a Rupa Kalapa. Then we also know that these particles in a hardness, the small particles made out of a small particles, do not scatter in the space. They are kept into a certain shape. That is because of the cohesion. That is the cohesion that is acting in between two Kalapas, Antar Kalapi Apo. So now what we have to think is a solid is not scattering. The particles are kept in a certain volume. Why is this? What is this attribute? So when we think, we understand there should be a certain bonding nature. So that bonding nature is, we call it Apo. So likewise, now if I go into the handout, yesterday's handout, 2.52, a solid is hard, and when touched, one can feel its surface. It is capable in bearing upon it another solid with a relevant mass. Normally, a solid does not allow another solid to invade the space it occupies. These characteristics indicate the existence of an element of Patavi in it. So these qualities are not the solid thing. both Kalapiya and Antarkalapiya are responsible, Patavi are responsible for this attribute, for these features of the hardness. Right? Then a solid has its own shape. It's not scattering. It does not change its shape according to the space it is put into, as a liquid does. It has a specific space, a shape. Particles in a solid do not scatter in space. It is not easy to separate solid particles as they are bound with each other. We know that. It's not easy to separate them, separate particles. Why is that? There is a bonding force. So this is understanding the realities from outside, from the perspective of a solid. We know this is not easy to separate, so there should be a certain force for that. That bonding force is not the solid. That bonding force is not the solid. The hard surface is not the solid. Solid means the entire thing. The solid means the entire thing, right? So then a solid is an extended body. Now we know that solid is a three-dimensional thing. It is an extended body. Why is that? Each and every particle in the solid occupies a certain space. They are extended. It occupies a certain space. So it shows that the particles in a solid are bloated by Vayu. They are bloated by Vayu. So, or when all the particles in a solid occupies a space, a unit of these solids would also occupy a space. Now, if you think about this mouse, we know it's bolted. Bolted means it has occupied a certain space, though there are small particles in it. So, who is responsible for this occupation of space? That is the Vayu within the particles. Each and every particle occupies a space, so when many particles come together, the unit also should occupy a certain space. So now to understand it, why this solidness, that the hardness, it's spread all over this area. Why it has a certain shape, why it occupies this range, that is because it has been pushed to this area. Even small particles are being pushed, so when particles are gathered, they occupy a certain space. So this shape, this size, or who is responsible for the size of the volume of the solid? That is the Vayu. So this Vayu is not the solid. Hardness is not the solid. The bonding nature is not the solid. At the same time, it has a certain coldness or heat within it. A cold or heat within it. It moves through the particles with conduction. It moves from particle to particle, and that heat can be measured. So it does exist within this. So these qualities can be known. These qualities can be known with our wisdom clearly. And also it has a color, it has a smell, it has a taste, and also it has some nutriment, because some creatures can eat this and survive. Right? So this is how we understand the great elements through the solid. But when we understood the great elements through a kalapa, we didn't have this idea of antarkalapiya case. But here, why another solid cannot occupy this space, even having a space between them, even having akasa between the two particles? That is because of antarkalapiya patavi. Why the two particles cannot be separated from each other? It's not the apo within a kalapa. It's because of the apo existing among the particles. So therefore, when we understand the four great elements in a solid, it's little bit different from how we understand the four great elements in a kalapa. Because when you are talking about a kalapa, we didn't want to bring this idea of interunitary four great elements. Right? So now the question comes, what is the practicality? What is practically applicable? We don't thinking about kalapas would surely give you some intellectual idea, but the self view, to get rid of the self view is not based on kalapas actually. We don't think kalapa as a self, right? We think this entire body as a self. So either we have two options. We divide it into small particles and get rid of the idea of a self and then understand the actuality of the particles. Or without dividing into particles, we understand the qualities within the solid. There are two ways you can do the Dhatu Manasikara. One has to separate the body parts first and then come into particles. Actually, there are three ways. You just go into particles and then contemplate the four great elements within the particles and how they exist in between the particles. The next way is you divide the body into some other parts, body parts, the 32 body parts, and see how the great elements exist within the body parts, the qualities, the mere qualities. In that, you don't need to go into particles. The other way is just take in this entire body as a one solid and consider about the qualities. You don't need to separate it into particles. But when you go into the anicca lakkana, most of the cases, such idea would come because you'll start to see how these particles, these qualities are packed as different units. Anyway, so therefore, in the practical aspect, some would go into particles and try to understand these as a unit of particles and then to understand the four great elements. For some, just looking into this entire body, feel the hardness. Another thing cannot go, our cloth cannot go into our body. And we know it has a certain shape. The body parts does not scatter in the space. Now, according to the Mahasi method, some books explain, while we are breathing in and out, the stomach expands and collapses. So, when the stomach expands, for instance, if this is the stomach, it comes and goes back, comes and goes back. Now, to a certain level, it reaches to a certain maximum level and it comes, goes, expands, and then it falls back. What is the reason why this stomach is not exploded? Why it doesn't get blasted? Because the particles of the stomach are held by a certain force. So according to these books, when you feel that force, the elastic force, which holds the stomach, the yogi understands this as apo. This is how the great meditation teachers have explained this. So what is this apo? This is the apo which holds the particles in a solid to a certain shape, to a certain space. So this is antarkalapya, right? This is antarkalapya. So even though we study, for a person, sometimes you don't need to study the entire explanation about the four great elements. Just explain it through a solid or through a body of matter and try to understand the four great elements. So I'll conclude with about the solid. So there is a hardness, you can touch it. For example, with the mouse, you can feel it. It doesn't let another solid to go through. This is hardness. This hardness is not the mouse. Then the particles in it are not scattering in the space. They are held together. So this is the apo. Apo or the cohesion is not the mouse. And there's a certain heat. It's not the mouse. And also they occupy a certain space. This occupation, this expansion, the extended nature is not the solid. It's not the mouse. So the mouse is a combination of all these qualities, the hardness, the bonding force, the expanding quality, and the heat that exists within this, or the coldness exists within. And also in addition, we have a color, smell, taste, and a nutriment also. So when we understand the qualities of a solid, we come into the four great elements. And that is relevant, that is enough for someone to lead this meditation, even without going into the particles. Then we come into another state of matter, that is apo, that is liquid. Sorry, the liquid. Yeah, it's better to, sorry, I made a mistake. For example, a liquid body, drava sarira. Even in a liquid, we still, if you touch it, you can feel the hardness, right? Certain surface can be felt, right? You can make a sound, you can touch it. A small thing that is not that much dense can float in it. So a small leaf will not sink into the water, right? It will float on the water. So the water particles are capable of holding something upon it. So there is hardness in it. That is the hardness that is felt when we touch it. And also the water particle, the liquid particles, if you take some drop of water, they are separated, but still, in order to separate something, some part of the particles from out of it, you need to have some energy. So it shows that they are also connected with each other. It's not like a gas. They are connected with each other. If you take about a flame, right? They are sticky. It's not easy to separate phlegm. It's easy to separate water from each other, but phlegm, they stick with each other. So this sticky nature, the binding nature, is called apo. It's lesser than that of a solid. That's true. It's lesser than that of a solid. Then a question comes: is liquid is less apo than a solid? No. Then the next quality of apo is the flowing nature, liquidity. Liquidity. Scientifically, we have a different explanation for this. But liquidity is some quality that can be felt with our mind. Liquidity is a quality that really exists, and it manifests. It gets manifested. So this liquidity is found in apo, in liquids, than solids. So Buddha's main aim of naming something apo, it is flowing nature, oozing nature. So therefore, that quality, that's 2.75, second paragraph. In addition to bondage, liquids flow, hence they have liquidity. Liquidity is one of the characteristics of antarakhalapiya apo, right? So we take a certain kind of a liquid, and we know it's flowing. That flowing nature itself is apo, and the particles in a liquid are bind with each other. So we should know there is a certain kind of bondage that should be known as apo also. That's why they don't scatter in the space like a gas. And then it also has a certain surface, a certain hardness, and it has a heat within it. Convection. It goes move through convection. So convection. It can be felt. It can be measured, and also liquid occupies a certain space. A liquid occupies a certain space. Why is that? Each and every particle in a liquid occupies space. So what is the reason for occupation of space? Is vayu. So it has a certain kind of volume. So when we know that a certain liquid has a volume, we should know there is vayu in it, the expanding, extended nature. Its flowing nature, apo. Flowing nature is not the liquid. And it has a bondage between the particles. This is not the liquid, this is apo. There's a heat within it. And also, it can be touched, it can be felt. There's a certain surface in it. So likewise, when you look into these attributes, we know that there is a hardness. We know there's a bondage, attraction. Then we know there's a liquidity. We know there it's a volume, extended nature. And we know it has a temperature. We know its heat or coldness. No, none of these are the liquid. A liquid cannot exist without them. So liquid is not a reality. It's a combination of these qualities. In the same way, solid also has these qualities, the hardness, and also it has a bondage. It doesn't have the flowing nature though. Then it takes a volume, extended. Then it has a heat. And also it has a color and so forth, right? We can also add color, smell and all these. Now these are the ultimate qualities. These cannot be reduced any further. Hardness cannot be reduced any further. It can be reduced into its causes, but not into its component, not into its constitutions. So likewise, now we understand, now looking into a liquid, we can understand the hardness in it, heat in it, the expanded, the extended nature, the flowing nature, and also the heat within it. Then we come into another body called gas bodies. We can think a gas exists in a certain space volume. It doesn't have a shape, right? A specific shape like the liquid, and it is more scattered. The particles are more scattered in the space. They go and hit at the surfaces. Even in a gas, wind, for example, we can still feel the hardness. That can be felt. You go in front of a fan, you can still, the hardness can be felt. The solidity is there. And then if you make the air stream more powerful, it can keep something upon it, right? If you blow wind upwards, sometimes small things can be kept upon them. Right? The solidity is still there. And also it moves very rapidly. The particles move very rapidly. Moving is caused by Vayu. Moving is caused by Vayu. Even within a liquid there is such moving. Then there is a certain heat within it. That heat can be measured, transfers through convection. Then it occupies a certain volume. Why is that? The gas particles themselves have volume. So when a group of gas particles surely would take a certain volume. But the thing is, the interbondage between two particles is very less. It's very close to zero in a gas, because they are wandering here and there. They are not that much bound to each other. The gases, it disperses in the space, right? Gas disperses in the space. Maybe there is some kind of a bondage in a certain gas. Maybe, I'm not sure about that. Surely there should be at least a little kind of bondage between the particles. So now think about, practically, how do we think about it? Now think a volume of gas in a balloon. It has a hard surface, sure, we can feel it. And more the gas within a certain volume, more the pressure is. Now, higher the pressure, higher the hardness can be felt. Right? Higher the pressure, higher the hardness can be felt. So it gives a certain push, makes a force upon its surface. So that push can be felt, Vayu can be felt. And these particles, how do we understand the Apo within this? There is no interbondage, interkalapa, unitary bondage, but the kalapas themselves have Apo. Because in a kalapa, the three great elements are kept in a one area. So looking into a gas, we should be able to know how Apo exists there. Right? So for example, in meditation we are supposed to think about the Vayu which comes up, which goes down, which exists within the bowels, which exists outside the bowels. So this gas, how do we understand this? Sometimes yogis have to contemplate all the four great elements in this gas. So hardness, yes, when it strikes on our body, when it comes up, we can feel a certain hardness, right? Heat is there, obviously. And then, what is the Vayu? The flowing nature, it flows. Flowing nature, it moves. Not liquidly flowing, it just moves. The Vayu is there, it expands. Collectively, it gives a certain force to the surface it strikes at. So the Vayu can be felt, the pushing nature can be felt. So how can we understand Apo? Apo is either the liquid body is kept, because when you keep a liquid body in one area, there happens a certain interaction between the particles. Even scientifically we know that. Maybe that's the Apo that the Buddha was talking, that the tradition is talking. Or in a particle, within a small particle, the three great elements are kept in a certain space, as Kalapiya Apo is surely found in the gas. So likewise, looking into a gas body, also we should be able to focus at our hardness. We know that hardness is there. We know there's a heat. We know there is a volume. It takes a volume, extended nature, and it also gives a push. It makes a force, it pushes, and also there is interkalapiya Apo, the bondage within kalapa, within particles, not between particles. Within particles. So looking into these attributes, we get to know none of these qualities is the gas, body of gas. If none of these qualities are present, we cannot call it a body of gas. Right? So what we concludes here is, now when we are looking into a physical body, if you can feel the hardness, you can feel a bondage, understand a bondage between the particles. If you can understand the liquidity, if you understand the extended nature, and also the heat and coldness, and the push given by this. In general, if you feel these qualities, These are the four great elements. These are the four. Resistance for another solid. Ability to keep something upon it. These are all the qualities of solid. So now looking into a physical body, we should be able to understand these qualities, and we should know these qualities do exist, not the physical body. There's not such a thing called the physical body other than these qualities. If there is no solid quality, there is no a solid thing. If there is no solid quality, there is not something called liquid. If there is no solidity, there is no something called a gas. So other than these qualities, we cannot find the physical bodies. So instead of knowing them as physical bodies, we should know them as different qualities. But how do we explain this hardness, bonding nature, liquidity? You cannot explain all just focusing on the kalapiya four great elements. So the great elements do exist. Exist means they do interact between the kalapas. Their effects can be felt among the kalapas. So in the meditation level, what we are supposed to do is to look into the great elements in this body, physical body. For example, if you can feel the hardness, right? Think this is the human, okay, we'll go into a new picture. This is the human body. Assume. Now we can feel a hardness in every part of the body. If you can feel it while touch, because hand doesn't go through, it resists the hand. We can feel even in bones, you can assume that how it's hard, right? Every body part has a hardness. If you can feel it, if you can understand this, this is knowing hardness in its own intrinsic nature. And there is a liquidity in some parts of the body, some body parts. The liquid nature, the flowing nature is there, like the blood, phlegm and so forth. And also the particles are not scattering in the space. They stay within the limitations of the body. Why is that? So the best example is the stomach doesn't get it doesn't get exploded. It's kept always into that area, it's held back again and again. This is because of apo holding this. And the liquid qualities in the body, that's the liquidity we have to focus on. And then we move on to another quality. The body is extended in the space. It occupies a certain space. Why is that? Each and every particle in the body has occupied space. That is the vayu. This is apo. That is the vayu. Then there is a certain heat existing in the entire body, or coldness. When you keep on focusing on these qualities, now if we name them, white color is hardness, then the blue color is cohesion, hardness is patavi, cohesion, and liquidity, both is apo, right, in blue color, sorry. Cohesion, cohesion and liquidity is apo. Then we come into yellow color, the extended nature, or push given is by vayu. You understand the vayu with it. Then we get the red color, heat or coldness, as tejo, right? So what we are supposed to do in our meditation is, in our four great element meditation, what we are supposed to do is to focus on these qualities one after another. focus on either hardness or the cohesion, bonding nature, or the liquidity, or extended nature, push or heat, right? So just give me a moment. Better to say the bonding force is better, right? The held attraction. So when we keep on focusing on them one after another, what happens is automatically the mind starts to forget the idea of a body. It starts to focus on these qualities only. Then the mind will start to say you that there is no such a thing called body other than these mere qualities. These qualities cannot be reduced any further. But if we examine, some of these qualities are the four great elements within a kalapa. Some of these qualities are the forces that exist in between the kalapa. So it doesn't matter in the end, as long as you can feel a hardness in a solid body. But if you analyze it, we have to come into the idea of antar-kalapi and kalapi. But in the practical level, in the Vipassana level, you don't need to distinguish them. If you feel hardness, that is patavi. If you feel the liquidity, that is apo. If you feel the bonding nature, that is apo. If you feel the push, that is vayu. If you feel the extended nature, the body has been expanded, that is vayu. Feel the flowing of the blood, even with mind, assuming the sticky nature of pus, of phlegm, and how the particles are kept in a one shape. This is apo, understanding the apo. The hardness you feel in your teeth, in your body, the skin, the bones, this is patavi. The heat which can be felt within the body. So what we are supposed to do is just keep on focusing on them one after another. Again, starting from patavi. Either you can change the order even. When you keep on going one after one, what happens? Like when we rub a ball of soap, with the rubbing, automatically the soap will decay, right? So likewise, when you keep on contemplating on the four great elements, one after another, a natural phenomenon, the ditthi, the wrong view, the self view, would greatly lessen. That is the explanation about now we understand there is nothing called a body. So through a body, we come into the four great elements. Then we come into another topic called variousness and oneness in a sarira. We call them nanatta bhava and ekatta bhava. Ekatta bhava. So each element in the body, whether it's antarkalapiya or kalapiya, whatever, always a certain great element is different from another. Patavi can never be apo. Apo can never be patavi. Patavi is different from all the remaining three. Any single element is different from the other three. So this is called variousness. So therefore, with these colors, which has been drawn with colors, patavi white color, for example, is not the apo in blue color. And also it's never the tejo in red color. It's never the vayu in yellow color. So they are different. This is called variousness. Even though it acts as a one solid unit, they are various. The qualities are different from each other. Then we also see a difference. The same quality, the hardness, same quality, we can see actually with our analysis, investigation, there are two types of hardness. Hardness that exists within the kalapa and beyond the kalapa. Right? Within the kalapa and affects beyond the kalapa. So these are also various. Especially the apo, the bondage between inside a kalapa and the bondage between the kalapas. Then regarding the kalapiya four great elements that exist within a kalapa, a certain great element, the hardness in a certain kalapa is different from a hardness in another kalapa. It's different from another kalapa, right? So if you draw it, you get a certain idea. Now, in a physical body, right, we have kalapas. The hardness is found and also in between the kalapas. Then sometimes we have a liquidity and also apo inside the kalapa and between the kalapas. We also have vayo inside the kalapa, and as a whole sometimes we can have a feel a push. Anyway, that is controversial. Then we can feel the tejo within the kalapa, outside the kalapa and within the kalapa. So now always two colors are different because they have different characteristics. The color that exists, the Mahabhuta exists within a kalapa and affects the outside the kalapa. We also can see, some can say they are different. And within a kalapa even, the apo in this particular kalapa and the apo in the next particular kalapa are also different because they have different locations. They are in a different space. They have a different arising. So therefore, these varieties within kalapas, within the entire sarira, we can see the variousness. So variousness helps you to get rid of the self-view, because always we have the self-view. The I-ness is one, always one. I-ness is one, right? The idea of I. So if you understand it's a combination of various qualities, the I-ness would disappear. The idea of I would disappear. Then oneness in a sarira is mainly, it's mainly due to the antarakalapiya apo, the kapo which exists between the kalapas, because this acts as a one body. Even you keep something upon this, right? We can easily separate it from the main body, but it is hard to take out one kalapa out of the body. Why is that? This entire thing is acting as a one unit. We can separate it, but it's different from a santana, but it's hard. You need to have a much stronger force to separate them. So they act as a one unit. That is the oneness of a Rupa Sarira. But more than the oneness, we can see the variousness in a Sarira. Yeah. So this would be the lecture today. So our main focus was to understand the great elements through a Sarira, especially through our body. So in our body, we can feel the hardness. If you can feel the hardness, if you can feel the bonding nature, if you can feel the flowing nature, if you can feel the heat or coldness or the extended nature, you are intact with the four great elements, right? If you keep on focusing on the four great elements, the idea of a body would disappear and the idea of only four great elements exist. That vision would be highly established. So this is the purpose of our lecture. So yeah, I will conclude the lecture and give the opportunity for the question and answers.
Thank you, Bhante. Sadhu. Yes, so hello everyone. As usual, if you have any question, you can raise your hand or you can put your question in the chat box. Yeah, hi Bhante, I have a question. So, if we cannot see individual kalapas, then how can we see or realize the nanatta bhava in the sense of, the four elements in this kalapa is different from the four elements from the another kalapa?
It's just an assumption and it's just an intellectual understanding, Dr. Ryan. We cannot come into that level of seeing kalapa. So it's just an understanding. So one part of Vipassana, some parts of Vipassana can be directly experienced. Like for example, we get our object and we see how the mind arises and passes away. But when we go into penetrate into the mind, inside the Chittuppada and see how they are interrelated. And also, for example, if we contemplate how a mind process within a one viti, how chitta is supporting each other, even they are intellectually understood based on our experience. So when we want to understand the nanatta bhava within among kalapas, it would be an intellectual understanding, not a direct experience.
I see. So, but this in the the meditation instructions, when they refer to the kalapas and things like that, that is we can only understand that on the intellectual level.
Yes.
We cannot.
And also, right? And also, sometimes in some teachers explain, they say when we say a kalapa, don't go into the actual kalapa, take a cluster of kalapas. Now, for example, a group of kalapas, they also are clustered. So take this as a kalapa. So they say, think a kalapa to the size of a rice grain. So this is still a group of kalapas. So in the meditation level, we don't need to go into the exact kalapa. So all the attributes of a kalapa can be found within this group as well. So we are not going to the actual level of the kalapas. It's an intellectual understanding. Another example I can give you is with the contemplation of the Kammaja Rupas in our lives. So according to the Patisambhida Magga commentary, there are three ways that we can do the Sammasana Jnana and also Udyabhya Jnana. See the rising and falling. When you want to see the rising and falling, for different elements we have to take different approaches. For some we have to take the momentary rising and passing away. For some we have to take the generation rising and passing away. For some we have to take the entire life. So in order to contemplate the Kammaja Rupas, if this is our Patisandhi, for example, the Patisandhi, and this is our Chuti, right? We know that the Chakku Pajnana, Chakku Prasada, okay, we take about Kaya Pasada, for example. Kaya Pasada arose together with the Patisandhi Chitta, right? And then this generation ends together with the Chuti Chitta, Kaya Pasada. So the commentary says, what is the rising and falling? How do we contemplate the rising and falling of Kammaja Rupas? That is based on the life. So the rising of Kammaja Rupa is the Patisandhi moment for Kaya Pasada. If it is for Chakku Pasada, few weeks later. The passing away of Kaya Pasada is the death moment. So if you are able to contemplate these two, we come into the rising and falling of Kammaja Rupas. We are not necessary to understand how they rise and fall momentarily. There is a secondary way. Think about the Uttuja Rupas. So Uttuja Rupas do have generations. For example, we go into an air-conditioned room and we come out of it. We go into an air-conditioned room and come out of it. Then we get different types of Rupas with much heat. Now think this, if you want to contemplate that the cold Uttuja Rupas, what we are supposed to do is see the rising, the beginning of this generation when we enter the room, and the passing away when we go out of the room, or maybe few seconds after we have gone out. So this is the rising, this is the falling. So with the rising and falling of the generation of Uttuja Rupas, even the Kammaja Rupas are also passing away together with them. They also have a similar generation. So now taking them as a yardstick, we can say the Kammaja Rupas also, Kaya also arose and passed away during this time. But that is the secondary. That is the secondary way. The main way of contemplating Kammaja Rupas is from the Patisandhi passing away is Chuti. So this is just an imagination. This is intellectual understanding, not imagination, intellectual understanding. So in Vipassana, this sort of understanding is also helpful and also eradicate the defilements.
I see. Thank you, Bhante. Sadhu. Please go ahead, Sally.
Yes, Sally.
Good morning, Bhante.
Good morning, Sally.
So for example, if the two persons, so one is Vipassana Yanika and one is Samatha Yanika. So when they come to the Kalapa part, if of course, so if the Vipassana Yanika, he is like a very young person, but his concentration is not strong enough, right? But the Samatha Yanika, his concentration is very deep. When he comes to the Vipassana practice, so if these two persons, when they come to the Vipassana practice, so their understanding about the Kalapa, it will be the same or will be different?
Yeah, this is the problem. Now, according to the according to the tradition that we have, both Samathayanika and Vipasanayanika are seeing the same thing. Only thing is, Samathayanika will be able to visualize with vividity, visualize vividly these objects. Other than that, it doesn't say that they penetrate into the Kalapas and see the Kalapas themselves. I'm not sure about that, but Sayadaw from Pauk Sayadaw says about this. I'm not sure about whether the Visuddhimagga is explaining that you see the actual kalapas in their actual form. So the thing is, to my understanding, in both the cases, Vipassana Yanika and Samatha Yanika are visualizing. They are visualizing the body, visualizing the objects. So the Samatha Yanika will have a very clear vision. Vipassana Yanika would have a lesser vision because of it doesn't matter, but sometimes even the Kanika Samadhi can be very strong about Vipassana Yanika, but surely Samatha Yanika will have a clear vision because the Samadhi is stronger. But the understanding the Vipassana Yanika's understanding can be higher than a Samatha Yanika because of his wisdom. So both have to have a pariyatti knowledge. Both has to have pariyatti knowledge in order to do the Vipassana. Because if just Samadhi was enough to see the reality, Buddha didn't need to preach the Dhamma, then would have say only Vipassana Yanikas have to study, Samatha Yanikas doesn't have to study. And there have been a lot of Samatha Yanikas in the world before the Buddha. Samatha Yanika means Samatha practitioners who had a very strong Samadhi. It doesn't say that you just focus on your body and you will start to see the reality as it is. So even in Pawak method, before you go into Vipassana, Sayadaw Ji gives you the instructions to teachers, a Samatha Yanika yogi, what is a kalapa, what are its components, how they are made out of, and what are the four great elements, what are the Kammaja-rupas, all the knowledge is given. Then we start to see it. So one can easily say that a visualization is happening. Otherwise the argument would be, if you are seeing the reality as it is, just by having a samadhi, you should be able to see. If it is not Dibba Chakku, for example, Dibba Chakku you will be able to see, but it is with a very special knowledge. It's not a Vipassana knowledge. So with a strong samadhi, people would be able to detect all their sickness. It should be like MRI scanner. Sometimes there may be instances that people have felt it, because another thing is when the mind is highly concentrated, it becomes sensitive to the organs, it sensitive to the body. So if there is a certain change in the body, some yogis may have felt that there is something wrong with, because our mind is highly sensitive to our body when we have a higher samadhi. So maybe there are instances, but if samadhi can see the things as they are, like in Dibba Chakku, then what happens? We will be able to see all the body parts as they are, and we'll be able to see each and everything what is happening inside the body. So when you read the commentaries, it doesn't say so, because what we are supposed to do is to focus on the characteristics. So what I personally understand is the Samatha Yanika's visualization is higher than of a Vipassana Yanika. Both needs the pariyatti knowledge. Based on the pariyatti knowledge, we visualize, and Samatha Yanika gets a very vivid view. But I am not fully guaranteeing my answer, because there can be some phenomena, exceptional phenomena. Maybe yogis are seeing, some yogis can see the actual reality as it is, but I really doubt if someone can see the actual kalapas in its actual form.
Okay, thank you, Pandit. Right. So that means, for example, if the Samatha Yanikas, his visualization is better than the Vipassana Yanika, that means he has the deeper understanding than the Vipassana Yanika regarding the kalapa part.
He has a benefit of deep understanding. Benefit of it. But understanding comes with the wisdom, panya knowledge. So for example, Mahamoggallana was a Vipassana Yanika. But he had much wisdom than any other Savaka except Sariputta. So therefore we cannot exactly say that the Samatha Yanikas are high, because how their wisdom has been grown, developed throughout the samsara would surely affect. But the Samatha Yanika has a benefit over the Vipassana Yanika, because he can see clearly.
Okay. So another question. And when we talk about the bondage between the kalapas, can we see it's like a gravity for the beings? You see, like us in the gravity in the space, the beings on the earth.
Yeah, Now thing is, if I use the gravity exists in huge objects. Now we are talking about the quantum gravity. So normally the bondage between the small particles are happening due to electromagnetism, the charge, and then the higher strong nuclear force which is transferred by gluons. So we normally don't call it the gravity. To my knowledge, we don't normally call it the gravity. Some places I've heard that they are talking about the gravity. Yeah, some sort of a bondage, but mostly I would say it's an electromagnetical force. So there are four main forces: gravity, electromagnetism, weak force, and the strong force. So strong force and electromagnetism do exist between the particles. I'm not sure whether the gravity exists in that level. I'm not sure about that. So yeah, somehow Earth's gravity is between two bigger objects. So and after the Einstein's theory, it becomes different. Like the gravity is not a force, then it curves the space-time, and then due to the curve, the objects are attracted to each other. So anyway, it's something like that, a certain kind of a force.
Okay, thank you so much, Bhante.
Yeah.
Thank you, Bhante. Sadhu. The question is, Bhante, in meditation, experiencing via Nanatta Naya Mahabhuta Sarira dispels Atta Ditti. How about Sassata Ditti? In other words, how can the mind get convinced about its being anicca? Must it be only through scripture knowledge? Because actual kalapa visualization is the area of Buddha only?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Now, there are a few points that the question has covered, so I'll address them separately. In the first place, while practicing Ditti Visuddhi, you get rid of the self-view. Get rid of means subdue the self-view. The 20 types of Sakkaya Ditti. In order to get rid of the 62 types of wrong views explained in the Brahmajala Sutta, I hope the one who asked the question is aware of that. In Brahmajala Sutta, we have 62 types of wrong views. In Patisambhida Magga and many suttas, we have 20 types of Sakkaya Ditti. And according to Yamakatula Sutta, it becomes 22. Because the 20 types of Sakkaya Ditti explains either Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankara, Vijnana as self, or the remaining, other than that particular aggregate itself. In the Yamaka Sutta, we find all the 5 aggregates are considered as self, and something other than the 5 aggregates are considered as self. So we have 22. So all these 22 self-views are subdued by practicing Ditti Visuddhi, Namarupa Paricheda and Namarupa Bhavattana. Then, in order to get rid of the self-view regarding the mentioned in the Brahmajala Sutta, because they are related to Pubbanta Kappika, Aparanta Kappika. Kappika means contemplating or thinking. Kappana is thinking with wrong view. Ditti Kappana. Pubbanta Kappika means ones who thought about the past existence with a wrong view. Aparanta Kappika, ones who thought about the future existence with a wrong view. So, 62 views in Brahmajala Sutta are related to the existence. How this happened from past to present and present to future. So when you talk about Sassata Ditti and Ucheta Ditti are under the Sakkaya Ditti, that's true, because we can divide all the 62 into Sakkaya. All the 62 are based on Sakkaya Ditti and we divide them as Sassata and Ucheta. And we say Sakkaya Ditti is the main reason. But still, the subdivision happens in different stages. Sakkaya Ditti is subdued, that there is no self here by Ditti Visuddhi, and we get rid of the after we understand there is no self. You cannot have Sassata Ditti or Ucheta Ditti technically. You cannot have technically, but it's not fully subdued unless you see the reality, the opposite reality to this view. It's not fully subdued. So even though one gets rid of the strong view from the Ditti Visuddhi, in order to fully subdue Sassata Ditti and Ucheta Ditti, eternal view and annihilism view, because some are not familiar with the Pali, eternal view and annihilism view, that the permanent self exists throughout the samsara, or self would get destructed one day or another. So these two views, we haven't contemplated the opposite doctrine for the reality, that is a Paticca Samuppada. causal relationship from one life to another, either Patisamuppada or Kamma Vipaka, whatever. So this dependent origination, the cause and effect relationship, only when we contemplate that the Sakkaya, Sassata Ditti and Ucheta Ditti is subdued. That's the next point. So it happens in the Kanka Vitarana Vishuddhi. 62 types of wrong views will be subdued at the Kanka Vitarana Vishuddhi. Then the question comes, his question, or the person's question comes, Sassata Ditti means this life is traveling, self is traveling from life to life. So when you understand that Sankara and Vijnana are two different realities, and there is nothing that transmigrated from past life to present, and Upadana is a different reality, Upapatti Bhava is a different reality, Kamma Bhava is a different reality, you see the link between them and there's nothing moving from life to life, then you get rid of Sassata Ditti. Sassata Ditti means transmigration of a self from one life to another. And then Sassata Ditti also is opposed to Anicca view. That's the question. That's why the question was raised. Another opposite aspect of Sassata Ditti is Anicca, doctrine of Anicca. So then, when you start to see the momentary passing away of realities, the Sassata Ditti would be subdued greatly. So it also says that Sassata Ditti, which says that the entire there's a one thing throughout the entire life, is also called Jiva Ditti, one living thing continuously throughout the life or life to life. That is called Jiva Ditti. So when you see the momentary rising and passing away, that wrong view is also subdued. Then the question was, if we are unable to see the kalapas in their actual form, can't we get rid of the view? That's why I mentioned when Dr. Ryan's question, in some places in Vipassana, we become very close to the reality as it is. For example, we hear a sound, we know it passes away. We get to know a thought arise, it passes away. But whenever we think about the relationship from past life to present life, present to future life, the anupanna khandhas, the non-arisen realities, all these are intellectual analysis. So in Vipassana meditation, there is no fundamental saying that you have to have a direct experience. It also mentions, according to the Nettipakarana, there are two types of wisdom in Vipassana. Paccakka jnana, Anumananyana, inference, Anumananyana. Paccakka jnana, direct wisdom. In Ditti Vishuddhi, we get the direct wisdom. Direct wisdom doesn't mean you see the object in its actual form. We understand the characteristics directly. For example, if you feel the hardness in your kidney, which is inside our body, which may have never seen unless you have done a scan. If you feel the hardness, if you can imagine the hardness intellectually, the shape, based on the shape and the size, you know that there is hardness in it. That is a direct experience. Direct experience. Direct means you are able to understand the quality in its actual form, as the quality, as the hardness. But you will not be able to, unless you touch it. Maybe the kidney, the softness or the hardness of kidney is different from our skin, for sure. It's different from the heart. I have never touched the heart of a human, so I will not be able to exactly say how it feels. And our dead human, surely you can touch a heart of a dead human. Some would have done that. But how about a living human? How different it is? We are not necessary to see that detail in such detail. As long as we know its hardness, that is a direct experience. Then Anumananyana, according to Theravada tradition, Ditti Visuddhi, the seeing the characteristics, is a direct knowledge. If you understand the basic characteristics. Seeing the Tilakkana, impermanence, suffering and non-selfness, these are Anumananyana. For example, the example I gave, how the Chakku Pasada arises and passes away within this entire life. This is called Anumananyana. We assume that if something is made of causes, it has to pass away. And we also, for example, how do we imagine that every human being in the world would pass away? We don't need to see exactly how they are passing away. We are making an assumption. What is the assumption? If something is made out of a cause, and if that cause is impermanent, we can come into a guarantee that this thing, newly arisen, would surely pass away. So this is an Anumananyana. Then the question may comes, what is the wisdom now? When we are meditating, we feel the rising and falling of, we can understand the rising and falling of sound. We can see itchiness rises and passes away. Yes, that is also seen the rising and falling. But when you go into the Vipassana technique, we see how the Chakkuprasada rises and passes away at the death moment, arose at the in the mother's womb. Kaya Prasada at the Patisandhi moment, passing away at the death moment. And also how about the rising and falling away of a Deva of the 31 realms, every being in the 31 realm, by the objects. So all these are based on intellectual and for understanding the characteristics, to understand the characteristics, you don't need to go into a cause. You have to directly see the characteristic it is itself. You have to feel it, just the characteristic. But how do we assume that every object in the world passes away? Is it because the sound that we experience has arisen and passed away, it just passes away? No. There is an underlying philosophy for that. That's Buddha's explanation. Anything that is made out of impermanent causes is impermanent. So based on that, knowing that causes are impermanent, we come into a conclusion that everything has to pass away. So this is an intellectual understanding. To some extent, we experience certain objects rising and passing away, but the philosophy beneath it, that you have to understand, anything made out of cause passes away. Now think about the sutras, how the enlightenment happens. Yang kinchi samudaya dhammang sabbhantang nirodha dhammang. Whatever arose due to causes is sure to pass away. That is the understanding of impermanence. So knowing that this nama rupa is made out of causes, one understands that it rises and passes away. So the eternal view would vanish. So I'm not sure whether I gave the exact answer for that. So the question, now I'll summarize my answer. I addressed 3 or 4 points. The self view is subdued at the Ditti Vishuddhi, while the 62 views explained in the Brahmajala Suddha is subdued at the Kanka Vitarana Vishuddhi. Then eternal view is opposed to the doctrine of impermanence. That, for get rid of that, you have to see the rising and falling of Nama and Rupa. Then that rising and falling of Nama and Rupa is not necessarily that you see it in actual form or an actual level. Just understanding whatever arises, passes away is enough for your understanding. So that's why if you think about the Chakkuprasada, the rising and falling of Chakkuprasada, we'll never be able to focus on this because it happens at the death moment. Kaya Prasada arose at the Patisandhi moment. Chakkuprasada, when we were at the mother's womb, we'll never ever be able to contemplate his rising and falling in the actual way. It's just an assumption. So the fundamental is both the direct wisdom and the assumption wisdom are capable in liberating us from this samsara. That's the most important thing. I will conclude my answer. Now, at the final moment before entering into Magga, either we have to contemplate a sankara either as anicca, dukkha and anatta, any of the sankaras. It can be while we contemplate the rising and falling and considering Chakkuprasada as anicca or dukkha or anatta, someone can enter into Magga. It means someone contemplates the Chakkuprasada arose, the Kaya Prasada for example, Kaya Prasada arose at the moment of Patisandhi and passed away at the moment of Chuti. So it's impermanent, suffering and non-self. While he is contemplating on that, one can enter into Magga. So it means that even the highest level of Vipassana can happen at the level of inference.
Okay, thank you, Bhante. Sadhu. We don't have any more questions.
Are there many?
No more questions.
No more questions. Okay. Right.
Yeah.
Okay, then we can call it a day.
Yes.
Okay, right. So thank you for listening, and tomorrow we'll discuss about Rupa Santana, a new lecture. Rupa Santana, not only focusing on Rupa Santana, I shall focus on Nama Santana, Rupa Santana, and Nama Rupa Santana, which more emphasis on Rupa Santana. And then next week I'll move on to the explanation, the definition of Mahabhuta and Upadaya Rupa. Then I move forward to explain the definition of Rupa, and then starts to explain each and every Rupa separately from next week. Yeah. So thank you for listening, and may this merit help us to attain the Nirvana as quick as possible, and also help to prolong the Buddha Sasana. Buddha Sasanang Chirantittatu. Buddha Sasanang Chirantittatu. Buddha Sasanang Chirantittatu. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.